Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the June edition of Law Chat, which is sponsored by Moore Markhams, accountants and business advisors specializing in financial services to the legal profession. And it's my great pleasure to welcome this month the CEO of Portia in Christchurch. That's Jarrod Coburn. Jarrod, welcome to Law Chat. We're going to talk about the next generation today, and basically how to employ, train, and retain law grads who are straight out of law school. And I know that in your experience, you have worked with a lot of younger people these days and getting to obviously be aware of their principles and their ideals and how that can, I guess, help develop the culture of a law firm. But before we get into some specifics, I wondered if you might just tell us a little bit about your background and your experience with Portia and the younger generation.
Okay, thank you. Yes, indeed. Well, I was younger once. We were in a generation called Generation X, which was probably the very start, I suppose, of the trend towards being awake to the world, if you don't mind me saying. That's because we got the internet, we got cell phones. There was a lot more mobility, social mobility, and also communication. I've worked throughout both government, local government, private enterprise, and charitable sector. My heart's very much along the community lines and building social capital, as opposed to as a means to financial capital, as a rather than the other way around. We started Portia. My wife Erin and I started Portia in 2012 with the view to be able to provide access to justice to all. And we have, I think, done a fairly good job over the last 10 and a bit years. We're the fifth largest legal aid provider in New Zealand overall. And for probably 8 years, we've been the largest family legal aid provider in total. And we're probably the largest family violence provider in New Zealand as well, litigator. Yeah.
And tell me, how many people are working under your banner?
So at the moment, we've consolidated quite a bit since COVID. So we were at a peak of 25, which I think we had around 17 lawyers. We're sitting at 11 lawyers at the moment with 16 people in total. And it's quite a comfortable little wee place to be sitting in.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, even though we've cut back on staff, we're still probably putting through the same amount of caseload. So this reflects on the push towards automating a lot of systems and introducing a lot of technology into the firm.
So since 2012, not only have we seen a lot of technological advances, but I would imagine that you and Erin have obviously had a number of young people working with you, and that's obviously, I suppose, been very beneficial for you and the firm generally, and has given you a first-hand understanding of what the new generation want out of a career in law. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. Look, I think every person who studies at university walks out with some sort of unreasonable expectation of what their chosen field will offer them as a career. And one of the biggest life lessons we have post graduate study is the reality of how different work is compared to university. But a lot of those ideals that law graduates have relate to things like natural justice through to equality of arms, to doing some sort of social good. It's more than a career. You know, law has been described by many people as more of a calling. And what the decision that Erin and I made right from the very start is that we weren't going to step on people's ideologies when they joined. We were going to take what we could and sort of add it to the culture of the firm as we grew it.
So effectively, I mean, you kind of started off with a blank canvas in 2012, which in many ways, I guess, in this day and age, is probably quite advantageous.
Yes.
Have you found that the new generation have helped to shape the culture as it is today in Portia?
Yes, very much so. Um, Law over the last 10 years has had an enormous upheaval, partially driven by external social factors, but very much driven by some people who have taken, stances around certain things, and I think I think it's fair to say that the to look at some of the drivers, okay, over the last 10 years, the Me Too movement, huge driver for change in law. George Floyd, the Arab Spring, a lot of these international events have touched upon New Zealand. We've got people like Olivia Wensley, a young female lawyer who took a real stance around the Me Too movement, and especially around what was happening at Russell McVeigh. The Wellington Women's Legal Association were really pushing for information to be brought out into the open. And these issues, particularly around the treatment of junior lawyers, these are things that are not isolated. These are things that have been part of the profession for many, many years. So it's not that somebody did something and the whole profession of law had to pivot. It's just that I think there was a critical mass of younger people who just got sick and tired of it and decided to use their voice. And of course, they're using their voice through social media, through informal networks. And, that's led on to the Aotearoa Legal Workers Union, which again is just really pushing for change in terms of how young lawyers are being treated.
Do you think that this new ideology, if you like, or mode of expression that's coming through as a result of these world events has fed the sort of somewhat tired, stereotypical definition of wokeness, if you like, the sort of views of the older generation who've perhaps struggled to come to terms with, these new values or this ideology, and perhaps the way it's been spread?
Yeah, look, I do. I looked up on uh, Urban Dictionary the definition of woke, and initially, when the term became popular, the meaning was about when an individual became more aware of social injustice or basically any current events related like bias, discrimination, or double standards. But time has passed, and the term now has become sort of pejorative, and it's become a bit of uh, a bit of a marker to highlight intergenerational attitudes, particularly between the baby boomer generation and Gen Z and younger Gen X, millennial generations. It's not new. Every generation has its own struggles with the older generation. I think it was Oscar Wilde, maybe I'll be corrected if I'm wrong here, but I'm pretty sure it was Oscar Wilde who quipped that youth is wasted on the young, which is a very arrogant thing to say, because as we trade youth as we get older, we trade youth for wisdom. That's the way it has always worked. That's the way it should work, and it's our responsibility as we get older to share that wisdom back to the young. It's unfair to expect that young people are born with wisdom. But the younger generations today, I think, are more equipped to be aware of the social issues that surround us and to be much more of a voice. Example, she's rolled out all the time, but Greta Thunberg, as a voice for climate action, as an example. There are many, many, many other young people, mostly women, who at a very young age stand up and voice their concerns. But you can chart that back to Joan of Arc.
Yes. And in a strange way, isn't this an example of the younger generation actually teaching the older generation?
Well, yeah, well, that's right. And I guess this is one of the things that I really enjoy about having younger staff members is it helps me keep in touch with what's actually happening in the world. I don't just shut the door. I don't just get my news from the press or the Dominion, the Post or the Herald. I'm not living in that world where I'm dictated to. Um, I'm not only receiving information about what's happening in the world, I'm also being forced to know what's happening in the world. I need to understand what TikTok is. I need to understand who the main influencers are. I need to do this because I need to be relevant to my staff. Um, I mean, as it is, they think I'm some sort of old fogey that, doesn't really have a clue. But by golly, if I didn't stay on top of things, I would be really, disadvantaged. And so at least our workplace has a camaraderie, and something that binds us together because I'm taking the time to put an effort to understand the viewpoint of our younger staff members.
You must be a very active listener.
I get talked to a lot. I don't know
Yeah.
if that's the same.
But you actually go out and seek this information rather than just waiting for it to be delivered to you, if I can make that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not something that you can just click your fingers and do. It's something that I've done all my life because I've always wanted to remain relevant. I
Yes.
made it a point. I suppose, from my parents, not understanding my point of view when I was younger really annoyed me. So as I went on in life, I made it a point that I was never going to do that to people younger than me because I don't think they deserve that. Sure, they're ignorant about many things, but that's not their fault. It's just that they haven't lived as long as we have. So let's help them, not put barriers in their ways. I mean,
So,
yeah.
so I didn't mean to interrupt, but I'm guessing taking that argument, which was beautifully made, there would be, I guess, a lot of 50-plus-year-olds, our generation, who perhaps are a little frightened or concerned that they are becoming increasingly irrelevant or that they don't fully understand the younger generation. So that being the case, what do you think are the implications for law firm leaders here in all of this, in terms of the way they manage or lead their people?
I think the biggest risk, if we use the term risk properly, is the loss of opportunity for what the younger generation can offer. I don't particularly see many of the younger generation coming through that have better digital skills than me, for example, because I grew up pulling computers apart and putting them together and learning to program in BASIC and so I know computers from the ground up, whereas they've inherited a fully digital world. But unfortunately, this is usually what people think of the young folk coming through is that they are more technically and digitally enabled. What they actually are is they are more digitally connected with one another. So, for example, here's a really great example. I have at work a group of people who have a chat group. It's just called the chat group. Okay, I don't even know what it's on. It might be Instagram. It might be Facebook. I've got no idea what it is. And every new member of staff who comes on board at some point gets invited to join the chat group, right? I'm not on the chat group. Erin's not on the chat group. We don't have access to this chat group. I've got no idea what they talk about. But they use that to communicate with each other informally about stuff that's going on that's going to affect them in a very minor way. Like, for example, I'm coming in at 3 o'clock. I've got a court case. I need a car park. Can somebody make something available? I'm feeling sick this morning. I won't be coming into work. Can somebody take over my files for the day? That sort of thing, right? I'm not at all worried that that's happening. They know well enough because they've been trained not to put any confidential information on there. They know it's not secure. So they don't do that. They don't talk about client names or anything like that. But it's a way for them to have a really direct communication with one another. That means that management doesn't have to be involved in decision making at that level, because that's not what management should be there for.
That would be
So,
micromanagement, really, wouldn't it?
well, yeah, and a lot of people think that when they have manager in their name, that means it gives them a right to interfere with other people's work, and it doesn't. The whole point of a manager and the point of a leader is to enable people to do their jobs and to enjoy it. That's my role, is to make sure that the barriers are removed. So um, anything that I need to do to make my staff's work easier, I'm going to do that. And this is something that the younger generation appreciate and respect, because what they don't really get, and I don't blame them, is they don't get what the point of hierarchy is. They come out very egalitarian, and they come out thinking very holistically. And so this is something that, if you want to embrace and get as much out of your younger lawyers and younger staff as possible, you need to be creating the environment that they thrive in.
And what do you think, therefore, the implications are for lots of law firms out there that perhaps historically have had the sort of command and control type model and were quite in hierarchical structure?
Well, I mean, if it works for them, it works for them, and that's fine. And there's always going to be people who are are going to thrive in that environment, and that's okay. They're probably going to find that they'll have staff leave who are not comfortable with that environment, and that's okay, because this happens. This arbitrage of staff, they move within law firms. I'm not saying in particular that our staff are better than any other law firm staff, because the quality of lawyers in this country, I think, is very, very high. But what I'm saying is that um, they, I think it's fair to say that they appreciate the efforts we make to welcome them into the firm and to make them feel like they are an equal part of the firm. And in return, we get a lot of benefit out of that. It's very hard to point to, but the culture of our firm is very supportive, collegial, collaborative. Our staff look out for each other, and they look out for Erin and myself. They work hard, and they understand that we don't expect anything beyond what we pay them. They're not expected to work 80 hours a week or stay late, but they do sometimes anyway, because that's what they have to do as lawyers to deliver the work for their clients. Um, I, I mean, to me, that's how every business should be, but other people have other opinions.
So, for those who are watching, who might saying, "Look, this is perhaps a little bit different from what we do in our firm, or we're a bigger firm that might never work in ours." Is there any good reason that you can see why your style of leadership of the younger generation shouldn't work in a larger firm? or a practice group or a team in a larger firm?
Yeah, I think it's look. I think that's that's an enormous organizational management question, Simon. I suppose, yes, you're getting down to the nub of it, aren't you? I suppose that the style of leadership we use, we don't have hierarchy. We have more of an egalitarian approach. So there's a lot of equity in amongst the firm. I don't see myself as being anybody's boss, but when the time comes to make decisions, I'm going to be the one who makes the decisions. When things go wrong, I'm going to be the one who takes responsibility for it. But my preference is that I never have to make a decision and I never have to take responsibility, because everyone's working together well and nothing goes wrong. That's the epitome of, I think, successful leadership. I can then focus on strategic issues. And I think, if anything, the fact that the firm runs in a way where everyone is trusted and everyone, I can trust people to come to me or to Erin and say if they've got a personal issue going on in their lives, or if they're not happy with something. If I can trust that they will do that, then we can focus more on the future. And I think this is where a lot of law firms possibly let themselves down, especially the small to medium ones, is that they work far too much in the law firm and they don't look towards the future of the law firm.
Yeah. And beyond what the practices that you've described, do you have a sort of perhaps more formal system for eliciting feedback from your team members? Is it just like an open door policy, or do you do a once a year, let's get the perspectives from the team in terms of constructive criticism, observation about how the firm could be even better, or anything like that?
We've got a number of different ways of doing that. We do have a formal review process because that's fair, but we don't just leave it to once a year. We have an ongoing series of things. For example, our junior lawyers, when they first start, they have a weekly meeting with the principal lawyer, something called UFL, which is UFL, the Universal File List. So they've got a list of all of their files, and this principal lawyer goes through them every week. After a while, they can elect to have it every 2 weeks, and then once they become proficient, that becomes a monthly catch up, and eventually it just becomes a case consults with the principal lawyer. We informally talk to them all the time. We hang out with them at lunch. We'll take them aside sometimes. We'll sometimes take them out for lunch individually or as a group, just to find out what's going on. There are leaders within our firm, so our associates are all very accomplished leaders in their own right, who will come to us if they see somebody struggling or if there's concerns, etc. So it's very much multiple routes of communication.
Yeah. And in all of this, I guess there's also a responsibility as a leader of your firm to ensure that the firm, I guess, meets the, if you like, the social expectations of your various stakeholders, not just your people, to be a good corporate citizen. How do you do that?
Well, we first of all, we have a very ambitious vision, which is to access to justice for all. That's our vision, and we have a very serious mission, which is to be the most ethical law firm in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Now, every time any of us make a decision about anything, we run those two things through our heads. It's really imprinted in our DNA. We have very firm fundamental foundations in our practice, and we go to a great extent to educate new staff when they come on board. So when staff are inducted, there are 42 lessons that we put staff through, depending on their role in the firm, beginning at the very first day with what my expectations are of staff as a CEO, and going through an entire spectrum of information, technical information about how the firm runs, how our systems work, cybersecurity, confidentiality. We teach them the ins and outs of the Privacy Act. We teach them about the judiciary, about the New Zealand Law Society. We go over again how to swear an affidavit, all the way through to advanced care of children and family violence legislation as they go on. And then they're ticked off in terms of a competency. So they're always accompanied at court for the first 2 times, and then they're observed for 2 times, and then they're ticked off in terms of having a competency to undertake a hearing or a judicial conference, as an example. So we put a lot of effort into our staff, and as part of that training, we also share with them our ideals about things like the Women's Empowerment Principles, which is a United Nations initiative, working with refugees, our position in the society hierarchy, etc. Yeah.
Wow, some really wonderful initiatives that you've obviously introduced and are working with on a daily basis. I'm thinking, I wish I'd done my articles in your firm. But then back in the 80s, life was a little bit different, wasn't it?
Yeah.
We've got 3 or 4 minutes left. I just wonder, in terms of winding this discussion up, and it really has been very fruitful, so thank you for sharing all these thoughts. For those people who are watching or tuning in today who are thinking, look, I perhaps need to do more to align my thinking with the younger generation, have you got, in a nutshell, 2 or 3 tips that you could share with those people?
Open your mind, become woke, if you want to call it that. Start getting a bit of an understanding about social justice issues that the younger people are talking about. We're starting to see a bit of that come in through the Supreme Court, through tikanga and the treatment of mana. So there's a lot of issues around cultural issues in New Zealand around Māori. Educate yourself about the Treaty of Waitangi. There's also the Te Ao Maorama initiatives that are going through the family court and the district court as well. Learn Te Reo Māori. A lot of our staff are learning Te Reo Māori at the moment. Get a grip about equality, about social inequity, about the women's movement in New Zealand. Erin, who is an ardent feminist, believes that that we're really overdue for a redistribution of power. I think the changes coming up to the New Zealand Law Society are going to see the profession start to improve quite a bit. Just look, open your mind is what I would say. Open your mind. Don't be afraid. Adopt some of the language that's being used, and talk to your younger lawyers and ask them, what are the big issues at the moment? Just say it's okay to say, look, I'm a bit old. I've lost track. Help me understand.
Yeah. Some wonderful stuff there, wonderful advice. I wonder if I can ask you a question, because what you've been sharing with us today, I think, is very inspirational. But I sometimes find that, the person who is the inspirer got his or her inspiration from someone in their lives, or a writer, or a parent, or a friend. Is there anyone in your life who stood out for you as being an inspiration for you to shine the light?
I have to say, my wife Erin has she introduced me to a whole new world of leadership that had a very ethical approach. And I thought I was a pretty good manager prior to entering into a law firm. She blew me away with this new way of approaching the world um, just a heightened levels of honesty and excellence and standards and ethics and professionalism. So yeah, I would definitely say that she has been my muse.
That's wonderful stuff. Well, look, thank you for sharing, and do send her my regards as well. And yeah, thanks for being part of Law Chat today. It's been great to see you again, and I look forward to catching up with you again very soon, I hope. But for now, take care.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone for tuning in this month, and we'll be back next month with another Law Chat. But until then, have a good month in July. We'll see you soon. Bye bye, everyone.